Read it.
I have.
Oh, that means a lot. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no, it was definitely.
Has everyone read it?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to pay more attention to this guy.
His questions are far better than mine. I can't speak for anybody else. I'll just take it all while I can get it.
All right. Thank you. So there wasn't a question. Okay, perfect. I like that's the best kind of question.
I have a question.
Sure.
So you had a really interesting story. I was in the panel. You talked about how your life just sort of changed over time. Had you done any writing before this?
This kind of writing, no. In fact, to be quite honest, no.
Okay.
No.
It seems remarkable.
Yeah, I feel very lucky. I mean, look, everyone, not everyone, but I had fantasies of being a writer, but I never pursued it in any sort of meaningful way until my late 20s. I liked what I did before. I liked the kind of work I did. But as per that story that I've already told you, and I won't bore you with again, I feel like there are lots of ways to do good stuff in the world, and I think economics and politics are one way, and I really believe that. I think entertaining people is another way. So, yeah, that's what led me here. I mean, I can tell you how this actually happened on a more macro or a more micro level. I developed the script with Sony. They said, "Who would you love to work with?" I said, "Ron D. Moore," almost the same way you would say, "I hope Santa Claus comes to my house today." And he said yes, and we sort of went out and pitched it, and we pitched it to Sci-Fi, and they immediately sort of got on board too. So it happened very quickly, and I do feel lucky.
So I have a question then. So when you did the pilot, did you break? Were you breaking the season down when you were doing that? Because my big question is that since you're doing it in a confined area, were there any concerns about keeping it interesting? Because there's not a lot of communication with the outside world. So how do you keep things fresh in such a confined area?
No, that's a really good question. Two ways. One, we want to play up the claustrophobia. That's definitely part of our story. So we're going to use that to our advantage. When the claustrophobia mounts and is sort of untenable, people will be going out of the base here and there. There is a space around. And the Arctic Circle, I don't know if you guys have been there, it's beautiful. It's the closest thing to being on the moon. It's haunting how isolated you are. And I think when you see our characters go out, it almost reinforces how isolated they are too, but it keeps it visually interesting. There's a second way, which is that this base is going to kind of unfold in some peculiar ways. They go in there thinking it's one thing, and there will be all the sort of mysteries and glories of a haunted house. There's going to be rooms they weren't familiar with, floors they weren't familiar with. So I think in those two ways, we will hopefully be able to address exactly what we talked about, because that's something we've talked about a lot too.
And you planned that out at least for the first season, like when you were writing
Absolutely.
the pilot?
Yeah. All of that's planned out in exacting detail.
Can you tell us about the, pardon my ignorance if you've already stated this, but
No.
writing every episode, about the breakdown?
No, we have a writing staff.
Okay,
So
it's like most shows.
Yeah. It's Ron, Steve, and I, but we have a writing staff. We have, I believe, 4 or 5 people, and they're excellent. They've all come off a series of shows that probably a lot of you really, really like. But no, I couldn't do all 13 on my own.
So can you mass how many you're writing, Mike Ron, like you're writing this first season?
That's a great question. I actually don't know that right now. We're breaking, so we have the episodes broken out, but who will write then sort of depends on a lot of things. And to be quite honest, scheduling among other things, and who's going to be in Montreal during shooting. So I don't know the answer to that.
With the setting being what it is, it almost kind of harkens back to the early days of television. I think that's kind of interesting. That Rod Serling, Padachevsky, New York Playhouse type stuff, where you have that set,
Sure.
And now sort of that intensity, that gravitas. Can you talk about what is informed the show? What inspired you guys? What fuels it?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I would say, first of all, the first thing I ever wrote was a play that was performed in New York, and yes, there was a very conscious attempt to do it in a compressed environment that wouldn't allow our characters to sort of escape. I mean, one of our storylines is our lead lost his wife because she slept with his brother, and all 3 of them are going to be reunited in this very contained foreign environment while all hell breaks loose. So there is a love triangle. I think it's a pretty unusual love triangle, and there's no escape from it. And I think that actually is very much like a play to me. As for your second question, could you remind me? There's a second part of that I just glossed over, and I don't want to. What sort of influenced it? It's a great question. And I was just telling them over there, I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of pop culture when I was a kid. I come from a pretty religious family, and when I sort of first got exposed to it, it was like an adult discovering ice cream. But two shows that I think have a really big influence on me, which is why I'm so lucky to work with Ron and Steve, are Battlestar and Lost. And here's how. Battlestar, to me, very much was a story about the struggle to survive. And that's definitely going to happen here in a contained environment. There it was spaceships, here it's a base in the Arctic. And Lost was the first show I ever saw where I felt lazy just watching it. I felt like if I wasn't trying to solve the mystery, trying to figure it out, I wasn't really sort of doing the show. And I think that both of those elements will play out in Helix. So Lost and Battlestar, and they're great shows, which I'm sure you've all seen. So, yeah.
How much material beyond season 1 do you have?
We know broad strokes. There's been no episode by episode breakdown. We do know where we'd like to go. It's going to be it's always going to. The virus was our entry point to the story. Very quickly, the bigger mythology is going to unfold, and that mythology will stretch over all the seasons. But we're hoping that each season will be a different case in a different location, hopefully. A bunch of mysteries that will add up to one sort of bigger story.
Okay. Do you have an ideal number of seasons, or is it just like, let's just go?
Yeah, we're going to go. We have enough to fill as many as we can. And obviously, I mean, I love the show. It's easy to love your own show. I hope the longer the better. We certainly have enough material. You'd have to ask Mark Stern that.
Did what you think the show would be like in your mind when you were conceiving it, is it different than what the show is now? If that makes sense, like once more collaborative voices got involved, how far did that shift? Yeah,
that's a great question. They have stayed very, very true to my vision. I mean, and I feel incredibly fortunate in that way. Ron is he has an incredible creative mind, but he's been very supportive. So we've sort of innovated within the boundaries that I set up from the beginning. I think the show will be different. I think it'll be better because of these people's involvement. But no, that's the story I wanted to tell. Now, who knows what will happen as we proceed? I've heard all kinds of stories from friends who have other shows, but no, so far we're dead on. Having said that, we start production next week, so who knows?
All your idea? Did you bring it to Sci-Fi or to Ron, or what was the genesis?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was my idea. I wrote it on spec. Quite frankly, my agency was like, this is kind of a crazy idea, but I went ahead and wrote it anyway, and then Sony got involved, and we sort of developed the script, but the exact same story. Ron got involved, still the same story, and then together we pitched it to Sci-Fi. So again, so far we've stayed pretty true to the path, but it has gotten better. I mean, working with Ron, really, it's kind of amazing.
Did they buy it on a pitch, or did you?
No, I actually wrote the script on my own. I think it would have been a challenging sell as a pitch. And you guys know what the pitch is. I mean, I don't think there's a good show I could have referenced and said it's like that. So, no, I did write the spec, and I'm happy that I went about it that way.
How do you feel about the casting news that you revealed today?
Oh, we're pretty happy. I mean, look, I think Billy Campbell's going to be great in that role because it's a very sort of nuanced thing. But Hiroki Sanada just happened today, and I don't know if you guys all know him. I always envisioned this guy sort of as the Japanese George Clooney, like a seducer, and I couldn't be happier. I mean, there are times when you sort of think that's the guy, and I thought that was the guy a year ago. So I think you're going to be pleased. I think he's going to bring a lot to the table. Both of them. Gotta remember, this is sort of like all a fantasy to me. Even I'm looking over your shoulder at the poster, which is the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. That was all in my head 18 months ago.
Can you talk about this first season and how self-contained it is versus the season that will follow in terms of story?
They're all going to be self-contained. They'll be in a different environment, but we want to play out the same sort of pressurized dynamics. So, no, the next season, if and when we change locations, it'll still be the same kind of story. They'll be trapped in a location. And
there won't be any lingering little threads from that first season?
Oh, absolutely there will be.
Okay,
No, completely. Because once the dominant mythology becomes clear, it's impossible to escape it. Because the mythology has ramifications for all of, Earth.
Okay.
So, no, definitely. There will definitely be story ties.
So it's not like 24 where you...
No. They'll be much more thematically linked than that.
Okay.
So.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Pleasure.
Congratulations.